Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from deep inside the heart of the future Liberty State. Sponsored once again by On Fire Ministries, in the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story and the news behind the news, where it's not about right or left, it's about right and wrong. It's about our hope not being in man, but in Jesus Christ. About not ending in prayer, but moving to action. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Father, deliver us from the evil one.
Welcome to Patriot Radio.
Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and today on Patriot Radio, more coming out about the Charlie Kirk assassination investigation. And this is going to raise some eyebrows, and we need to be paying attention to these networks. And we need to look at who's trying to distract us from the truth. Also, some developments in Ukraine as a pocket of Russians surrounded by the Ukrainian army and being annihilated as we speak. And lastly, the globalists taking it on the chin today by Donald Trump. And our guest, Robert Wilcox, the author of Target Patton, at least in my opinion, one of the best books written in modern times about the origins of the deep state and the murder of General Patton. Here at Patriot Radio, we want you to know the behind the scenes, the story behind the story ahead of everybody else, so that you and your family can be prepared for the times that are ahead and the times that are already upon us. So follow us on Patriot Radio, US/Telegram, patriotradio.us/Telegram, for real-time intelligence analysis and breaking news. And we're having quite a bit of controversy, but if you simplify this, it's pretty easy to see what is actually happening here at a geostrategic level. We're going to get into that here soon. That said, it brings us now to your wisdom from the Word. Coming to us from Hosea chapter 4, verse 2. And this is interesting. This is what these folks are doing in this time. There is oath-taking, denial, murder, stealing, and adultery. They employ violence so that bloodshed follows bloodshed. Therefore, the land mourns, and everyone who lives in it languishes. What we're seeing today is a coordinated attack on the United States of America to destroy it. Nation states operationalizing disturbed individuals, satanically influenced individuals here on American soil to sow chaos and to destabilize this country. And it's important that in this time, we don't get distracted by the crowd who cries, Israel did it, when the two sources for that document and that idea came from Pakistan. We need to ask ourselves the question in this time, what is the origin? Where is this coming from? Originally, the anti-Israel lobby, the anti-Semitic lobby, was a Soviet active measure. Started with something called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. You can read this in the book Disinformation by General Mihai Pachipa, the highest-ranking KGB official to defect to the United States during the Cold War. This isn't hyperbole. This isn't speculation. This is what they did. They actually had a shrine in Moscow dedicated against Israel, against the Jewish people. And quite often, people like to parrot things without going to the original source. And that's why when we see what the Marxists are doing in America, they're taking oaths together. They're denying everything that they're doing, and yet murder, stealing, and adultery, and the employment of violence so that bloodshed follows bloodshed is the fruit. So we can look at the fruit of what's going on from something, and we can know what the truth is behind it. And this is what the scripture says. Test the spirits. Look at the fruit. Judge something by the fruit. If you see people coming to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, you see missions all over the world, you see people's lives actually being transformed, you know what the origin is. But on the other hand, if you see discord, strife, contention, disruption, destabilization, chaos, crisis coming out of something, we also know what the origin is. So don't easily fall for the parroted narratives when the origin of a lot of this stuff was a Soviet active measure. And oh, by the way, thousands of KGB agents sent into the Middle East by 1969, according to General Pachipa. So you had KGB agents infiltrating Islamic organizations, and in some cases, starting them. Before Hamas, there was the PLO. Yasser Arafat was a KGB agent, was trained by them. The guy who sowed discord started the whole idea, really, of a Palestinian state. It didn't exist. So let's stop the nonsense. Go back to the primary sources. Go back to the Soviet defectors who came out, told us what was really going on, the strategic plans, like Anatoly Golitsyn, a strategic planner for the KGB. Read them. There's another great book called The Aquarium. It talks about how Soviet intelligence was run. How these strategies, they have 50-year strategies, just like China. The problem in the United States is we're looking at the next 5 years, that's a good day. And that's why we so easily get manipulated and deceived here. You have Islam and you have communism, whose stated goals by their own imams and their own writings is to overthrow the United States of America. That simplifies everything for me. In the Middle East, Israel is fighting against the jihadis. Doesn't mean there's not corruption. Doesn't mean there's not corruption in the United States right now. But at a geostrategic, big picture level, we can't lose sight of the forest, of the trees. We need to see that there is a grand strategy that is being played out against the United States of America through fifth generation war and other things, and we need to start fighting back. Stop being naive. Stop being easily manipulated. Start being what God calls us to be. Sons and daughters who know the signs of the times and what to do about it. That brings us now to your daily intelligence brief. Coming to us from the globalist front.
The future is built by us. We have the means to make progress on the global agenda.
Top developers are increasingly warning that AI coding produces flaws and risks. So the idea here is that the developer pool, while creating software applications that are full of holes and security flaws, is actually setting up a disaster across the whole spectrum. Artificial intelligence generated code has become a daily fixture for developers across the technological spectrum. These digital tools have made writing lengthy code much easier. However, experts say this trade-off comes with new security risks and continued need for human oversight so that we know what the holes are. So yes, something maybe have become easier. It doesn't mean it's better. Also, the globalists in apoplexy today, after Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, while hosting the Charlie Kirk show, read the Nicene Creed, talking about the supremacy of Jesus Christ. I'm sure that they are going to be talking about that for quite some time. Also, Trump hitting the globalists on the chin by launching a $15 billion lawsuit against the New York Times. We're going to see how that goes. And that brings us to the China front. Trump announced a deal regarding TikTok today. TikTok buyer lined up, but Beijing wants to retain the algorithm, so that deal might not be entirely closed. However, here is what he said, quote, "We have a deal on TikTok. We have a group of very big companies that want to buy it," end quote. The president is set to have a call with Chinese leader Xi Jinping on Friday to finalize the details. But it's unclear whether China will retain a stake in the U.S. version of TikTok. Quote, "We haven't decided that, but it looks to me," and I'm speaking to President Xi on Friday, "for confirmation of that," Trump said in response to a question on the matter. So China may actually end up with a stake in that. I know that's going to raise a lot of eyebrows. Illegal Chinese vapes are a national emergency. Tensions with China have never been, well, more tense, according to the author. While President Trump has led tough tariff negotiations, Chinese manufacturers are still flooding our markets with poisonous products, completely undermining that goodwill. Yeah, I think that's the right question. A lot of what China is sending to us is not something that we want on our markets, and I think eventually that's going to have to be addressed. That brings us to the Middle East front. The IDF has confirmed it has struck several targets at the Houthi Yemeni port of Hobadiah. He's hit military infrastructures. Also, it looks like structures used for arms shipments with Iranian support. Attack is in response to drone and missile attacks on Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu oversaw the strike against the military infrastructure at the port from the IDF's Underground Command and Control Center. There's some pictures of them right there. In the meantime, IDF troops have also begun expanding ground operations in Gaza City as part of Operation Gideon's Chariots 2. In the past day, IDF activity in Gaza City has begun according to the operational plan. You can see what they are flooding into right now. This is after a series of airstrikes, massive airstrikes that led that ground assault. The IDF chief of staff said that hostage rescue is a top priority in the Gaza City operation. He emphasized on the first day of the ground operation in Gaza City that returning Israeli hostages remains a key objective of the war, describing it as both a national and moral duty. Quote, "We operate in accordance with international law and do our utmost to mitigate harm to civilians," he said, adding that bringing the hostages home, quote, "isn't just a duty, it's something we will never compromise on. We will do whatever it takes to make it happen while staying fully within international law," end quote. Also, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Israel said full support for Netanyahu's plan to destroy Hamas. According to The Guardian, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, currently visiting Israel, declared that Prime Minister Netanyahu has the full backing of the United States in his plan to dismantle Hamas. Meanwhile, Arab media outlets quoted Rubio as saying that Hamas must immediately release all hostages and that the group only has a few days left to agree to a ceasefire deal with Israel. In other words, the clock is ticking. Time is running out. Also, Netanyahu coming out, shifting some priorities, but indicating a direction in the future for Israel that, quote, "We are going to produce an independent arms industry that can withstand any international or political constraints," end quote. Clearly reference to any future administration in the United States that might not be friendly to Israel. Also, Qatar and the United States are on the verge of finalizing an enhanced defense cooperation agreement, top U.S. diplomat Marco Rubio said on Tuesday after Israel's attacks inside Doha. And that brings us to the Russia front. Poland revealed it faces up to 50 Russian sabotage attempts daily, including hacks on hospitals and city water supplies. Again, this is following a very clear and very consistent, decades-old communist doctrine, and that is to attack water supplies and hospitals. Warsaw is boosting its cybersecurity budget after these breaches forced some medical sites offline and threatened major cities' tap water. Ukrainian agents deeply embedded in Russia launched an attack on a Russian military base near Vladivostok. That's on the other side of Russia. Large explosions could be heard at a military base housing the 155th Separate Marine Brigade, which is a unit guilty of severe war crimes in Ukraine, according to several sources. And according to reports, the multiple members of the unit responsible for said war crimes were reportedly liquidated and seriously injured in the blast. In other words, they targeted some of the leaders of that unit. And this is the farthest, at least it looks like the farthest operation carried out by Ukraine since the full-scale invasion by Russia began in 2022. Military and police have cordoned off the area around the base, with authorities claiming there was a gas explosion and trying to downplay the event. Also, Ukraine has surrounded hundreds of Russian soldiers in two pockets on the eastern front of Pokrovsk. Russian command has denied their pleas for retreat, and there may be a mass surrender in coming days. We're going to be watching that very carefully, as that may have a small impact on Russia coming to the negotiating table. But what's more likely is that the massive sanctions, if Europe decides to join and stops buying Russian oil, that will be more likely to bring Russia to the table. President Trump on the matter said that Zelensky and Putin hate each other. It looks like I'll have to sit in the room with them because they can't sit in the room together. And after we come back from the break, an update on the Charlie Kirk investigation and this horrible network in the United States that may be behind it.
What if I told you could convert your 401k or your IRA into gold? While your retirement is being beat up by a volatile stock market and inflation, it could instead be resting safely in physical gold at a place of your own choosing, including your own business. Look, gold has increased 50% in just the last year. Stock market, it's been nothing but a roller coaster. So protect your retirement from market chaos by calling Verity Metals today.
And we're back with the National Front. For 64 years, there was a protection against using U.S. resources for propaganda. Originally, the Smith-Mundt Act authorized the State Department to run international information and cultural exchange initiatives, but explicitly prohibited the domestic dissemination of materials produced for foreign audiences. That changed in 2012 in a modernization sponsored by Rep. Mac Thornberry of Texas, Republican, and Rep. Adam Smith, Democrat, Washington. Embedded in the fiscal year 2013 National Defense Authorization Act and signed by President Barack Obama on December 28, 2012. The changes took effect on July 2nd, and supporters justified the repeal by arguing that the law had not kept up with new technologies like the internet and satellite television, which blurred the line between foreign and domestic audiences. In practice, Obama's changes expanded the State Department and BBG's authority to produce and disseminate information through press, film, radio, and the internet and social media, making these materials legally available inside the United States to influence public opinion. So that's where it came from. Now, interestingly enough, some other revelations came out today. Senator Chuck Grassley revealed Biden's FBI put together a project to go after Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA and 91 other Republican targets. Arctic Frost was its name. And this whistleblower document very clearly shows a list of different organizations. If we could go to that right now. Critics call it evidence of overreach and weaponization. And the probe formed the basis of Jack Smith's electoral case. So again, if we can zoom, well, we can't really zoom in on this right now, but you'll see Turning Point USA clearly called out there. Charlie Kirk was fighting a battle he didn't even know. And the update on the case, Utah County DA Jeff Gray will seek the death penalty for Tyler Robinson. The charges: aggravated murder, felony discharge of a firearm, obstruction of justice, moving a firearm, obstruction of justice, disposing of clothing, witness tampering, telling a roommate to delete text, witness tampering, directing a roommate to stay quiet, and violent crime committed with children present. That's the state level charges, actually the local level charges. But I expect there's going to be more even than that, as some people are calling to account Representative Derek Van Orden. Now, you got to understand, this is a man who was a Master Chief in the Navy, SEALs. Quote, "You are responsible for that assassination," yesterday when speaking to the media. He flipped the Democrats' seat in the U.S. House to the GOP in Wisconsin. And while he spoke with reporters during or following Charlie Kirk's assassination, he made it very clear the role they played in amping up the violence. Every one of you, you're complicit in the attempted assassination of Donald Trump twice. You hear? You are responsible for this because you are echoing the horrifically horrible political violent rhetoric that being produced by the Democrat Party, every single one of you here. Now, I read that as it was written. Wow. Also, interestingly, the man who appeared to be a distraction immediately after the gunshot that took Charlie Kirk's life, claiming that he had done it. He was the first suspect detained in the shooting, was hit today with child porn charges. George Zinn, the first suspect detained after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, was hit with 4 counts related to child porn charges. He had been immediately cuffed and taken into custody after the TPUSA founder was assassinated at the America Comeback Tour event at Utah Valley University last Wednesday. According to reports, he falsely told police he had shot Charlie Kirk. He was charged with obstruction of justice. He was taken to a local hospital after complaining about chest pains, and that is when law enforcement went through his phone. Authorities discovered the child porn on his phone. Fascinating, all of the evil that is being exposed right now. Also, as is noted here, the allegations of him having child porn on his phone put out in a statement by sheriff's office. You can see there as well. Be interesting to see where this case goes, because what this tells me is they went through his phone. It's going to be interesting if there are contacts, if there's any connections to the network. Tyler Robinson. Also, a Marxist LGBTQ paramilitary group in Utah is under investigation by the FBI regarding the Kirk assassination, as the group's leaders' ties to the State Department and United Nations are revealed. You heard that correctly. One of the groups is a Marxist paramilitary organization called Armed Queers of Salt Lake City, which took down its Instagram after Kirk was killed. In a video that has since been scrubbed, the leaders of Armed Queers of Salt Lake City brag about a trip to communist Cuba in May of 2025, where they trained with militant Marxists to stage a revolution, quote unquote, in America. When they returned home, the leaders they met with boasted about being labeled terrorists by the United States. The group has openly coordinated with the Cuban government in various venues and events. There's a couple screenshots here from Data Republican as well. Now, Data Republican has uncovered more interesting ties between the Armed Queers of Salt Lake City's primary leader and various government entities. This includes this person being honored by the U.S. State Department, the United Nations, and her ties to the State Department affiliated NGO Utah Global Diplomacy. Utah Global Diplomacy recognized her as the recipient of the 7 for 17 award for advancing the UN's 17 goals. Per the 990 form with the Utah Global Diplomacy partners with the U.S. State Department to cultivate emerging leaders and diplomacy initiatives. This means she was selected to help shape U.S. foreign relations. And it goes even deeper than this. But Kash Patel also testified in the wake of the assassination today. He updated senators on a range of cases, but this is the one most people were paying attention to. And as part of that testimony, he said there are a lot more than 20 people in chats with the suspect in the Charlie Kirk assassination. In other words, he's saying there's potentially a much wider network. Now, this post by Data Republican outlines everything that was in there, and I'm going to go through a couple of these points right now. First of all, Palestinians at Cuba's ELAM studying revolution alongside medicine, brigadistas from around the world being taught for revolutionary orientation, and how every aspect of Cuban society is dedicated to training organizers and are open about the terrorist label to the point that they lament U.S. institutions do not allow them to speak in such a way. So this trip going down to Cuba was organized by the National Network on Cuba, linked to the Cuban state, which has U.S. NGOs as members, many of whom are linked to Neville Singham NGOs. The Salt Lake City Armed Queers is currently under a federal investigation for advanced knowledge of the Charlie Kirk assassination. And remember, like we just talked about, this person was honored by the Utah Global Diplomacy, State Department connected NGO. So this goes to the networking of Marxists in the United States and how much of this is operationalizing mentally disturbed individuals that are satanically influenced to destabilize the United States and sow chaos. Also, Command 11 brings up the point that U.S. political violence database reveals a critical trend. The period between 2020 and 2024 has seen 7 assassinations, surpassing the peak of the 1960s. These events are canaries in the coal mine. They signal deep structural rot, but rarely overthrow regimes alone, quote unquote. Also, Stephen Bunnell, also known as Destiny, calls for conservatives to be killed more often so that they will be afraid to attend events or speak out. There's an interesting dynamic, the psychology that they're trying to use of a public execution to keep conservatives afraid is actually backfiring, because we are all Charlie Kirk now. But they are interestingly calling in many of these channels, and there are so many screenshots of it, it's almost impossible to go through all of them. They're continuing to call for violence now, and this is part of what we've been talking about here on Patriot Radio, that they want to ramp up for a color revolution culminating in 2028. Also, some people are saying that these efforts aren't organized. This is just decentralized, a response to the fascism in the United States, except that it's not. Based on Armed Queers of Salt Lake City, here's a post where they talk about 6 principles: armed and militant protection, the end of capitalistic oppression and exploitation, binary and biological essentialism, housing is a human right, abolish police and prisons, and the end of the bourgeoisie. You know, it's interesting that Vladimir Lenin said also that you needed to eliminate the social roots of religion. Well, the social roots of religion is held in the heart of people, and that's why communism has led to more genocide than any other belief system in the history of the world. Also, Stephen Coughlin pointing out that some people are saying, well, there wasn't real violence that has been promoted by the trans terror information campaigns over the last couple of years. Well, here's examples of this. They know exactly what's being communicated, and one of these, the picture down in the bottom right corner, is of a lieutenant governor of Minnesota. So yes, this has been communicated: violence, incitement, gaslighting. All of this has been communicated. And so people are right to bring this out, call them to account. Question is, are any of these people going to be arrested for posting overt calls for violence? And you notice what the left did. Back even 10 years ago, they were trying to say that the right was violent. And they would say, oh, you know, the way that they're talking is coded, you know, dog whistling or codes for this and that, when they were actually saying these things all along. Also, President Trump just said that he has plans on designating Antifa as a terrorist organization. Now, I'm not trying to split hairs here, okay? But there's no such thing as a domestic terrorist in the statute. There's a definition of it, but there's no criminal statute under which somebody can be prosecuted as a domestic terrorist. There are terrorism statutes, and there's also the ability to declare something a predicate ideology for the purpose of investigations. But the law would actually need to change for this to officially take place unless it's designated as a predicate ideology for investigations, or unless something is changed as far as the definition regarding domestic terrorism and it's connected to another criminal statute. I'm not trying to split hairs here, but it's really easy for people to call for Antifa to become a domestic terror organization, but there's really no mechanism for that to actually happen other than what I was just talking about. I suppose also there could be maybe some sanctions or something put on an organization here inside the United States of America. After J.D. Vance and Stephen Miller promised to crack down on violent criminal far-left networks, Crime THINC, the collective that acts as the voice of American Antifa, is afraid. They say radical leftists haven't done anything wrong and that this is like Adolf Hitler consolidating power. They've operated openly, inciting violence on this platform for many years, according to Elon Musk, as he tagged, or according to Andy Ngo, as he tagged Elon Musk. They've mostly been banned here, but still run a few sites, and one in particular is listed. The group makes and disseminates attack guidelines and radicalization texts used by Antifa to recruit members. They also make guides for how to procure and make your own cross-sex hormones. One of its leaders is Shane Becker. Its texts have been linked repeatedly to criminal, violent cells and networks. They claim 2019 Antifa gunman William Van Spronson, who also cited Bella Ciao in his manifesto as one of their own. Interestingly enough, there was a picture of William Van Spronson, and not only did he say he was Antifa in a manifesto, but he also was wearing a hat that had an abbreviation on it that you all need to know. That abbreviation was JBGC, or John Brown Gun Club, another one of these organizations that is at least linked to Antifa. Also, over 100 teachers in Texas have their teaching certifications suspended, will be rendered ineligible to work in the state's public schools after endorsing the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I presume that this is just the start. 2 men, and this went underreported, 2 men were arrested after placing an incendiary device under a Fox News truck in Utah covering the Charlie Kirk assassination. Well, what were the names of these 2 men? Adib Nasir and Adil Justice Ahmed Nasir. I think there's probably an investigation there that needs to happen as well to see if they're linked to any broader terror networks. In a completely obtuse ruling, a judge dismissed terrorism charges against Luigi Mangione in the United Healthcare CEO killing. That prompted, of course, celebrations by the left in Manhattan after those charges related to acts of terrorism were dismissed. Mangione allegedly assassinated a United Healthcare CEO in furtherance of leftist politics. And again, here is the bottom line. There is going to be more targeting, not less. This is just the beginning. More targeting of patriot leaders, Christians, churches, property. That's what their plan is. What stands between them and success is all of us. The disruption of these Marxist networks and the jihadi networks inside the United States should now become of paramount importance. The Muslim Brotherhood needs to be designated a foreign terrorist organization. Notice I didn't say domestic, it's foreign terrorist organization. The Holy Land Foundation trial, which was the largest terror financing trial ever successfully prosecuted in U.S. history, had a list of unindicted co-conspirators. That list was upheld on appeal of entities that were either linked or part of the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. That would be probable cause for some of these networks to be further investigated and potentially prosecuted. Marxist networks inside the United States, who is funding them? Is a foreign adversary like China funding these networks inside the United States? What's going to come out of this? Now, I don't know if any of you have ever heard this before, but socialists use the same technique of brown shirts and black shirts. The brown shirts in Germany, the National Socialist Party, the Nazis, used brown shirts to sow violence, killing, intimidation across society. Then one night, and it was called the Night of the Long Knives, the black shirts came in and either arrested or killed all of the brown shirts. So Antifa and some of these trans terror cells that are across the United States right now, as they get exposed, that's not the end. Question is, who are the black shirts in the United States of America? And that's what people need to be asking. This is what you can do today. This is what people need to be asking their local elected officials, their local sheriffs. Questions need to be sent to local fusion centers. Who is actually going to replace the Antifas of the world, the trans terror cells? Because whoever that is already in motion. And that would be very important to know to disrupt these terror cells, obviously, inside the United States. Now, a little bit of good news. Kash Patel also testified and announced the arrest of 1,500 child predators, the discovery of 4,700 child victims, and the capture of more than 23,000 violent criminals, adding that many offenders are once again on the run. Wow. That last part, not good news. But the first part, good news. Wonder how many of those are illegal. Now, I know there are some people that are saying, well, Marco Rubio saying that he is going to begin canceling visas and sending home people that spoke out against the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Well, there are laws on the books already. When you fill out immigration paperwork, it asks you whether you are affiliated, provided material support for terrorist organizations. It also asks if you've ever been a member of a communist party. Because under U.S. law, if you say yes to that, you're not going to be admissible to the United States. Well, if you lied and you end up being part of those networks, yes, there's absolute legal grounds for you to have your visa revoked. So, some people are confusing free speech with controlling our border and following our laws. Any entity that is promoting the overthrow of the United States of America and the Constitution of the United States of America, like communism and like the jihadis do, well, they have no business being here. And Marco Rubio is simply enforcing the law. Last but not least, the Earth's protective ozone layer is healing and the hole should fully disappear in coming decades, according to the UN. Interesting how crises go away when they want them to. And that is the briefing. After the break, our guest today, Robert Wilcox, the author of Target Patent.
What if I told you could convert your 401k or your IRA into gold? While your retirement is being beat up by a volatile stock market and inflation, it could instead be resting safely in physical gold at a place of your own choosing, including your own business. Look, gold has increased 50% in just the last year. Stock market, it's been nothing but a roller coaster. So protect your retirement from market chaos by calling Verity Metals today.
And we're back with our guest today, Robert Wilcox, the author of Target Patent. I've been actually waiting for this interview for a long time. I'm a huge fan. Robert, thank you so much for writing the book and really enlightening us about the World War II timeframe and some of the conspiracies that murdered one of our best leaders back in that day.
Yeah, it really happened, and I think my investigations would prove it not beyond a shadow of a doubt. There are still some ideas in there, but Patton he wanted to go fight the Soviets. And our administration at that time was pro-Soviet, right at the end of the war, and they didn't like it. And so they took care of him.
My father actually wrote his thesis in college at Gonzaga University on the murder of General Patton. And so when your book came out, we were both huge fans, but also you really dive into the Soviet infiltration of the Roosevelt administration. But first, can you give us a little bit of background on what happened leading up to and then following the murder of General Patton?
Well, Patton was going to leave and go back and probably try and become a presidential candidate. And when they had tried to stop him first, his advance, and as a matter of fact, they did. They stole his gas. But then he kept on, and so when the war was over, Wild Bill Donovan, he had a special guy who would, for lack of a better term, kill people, and there were traitors that they had to go after, and so on. And he sent this guy Bazada after him, and Bazada went down and caused the accident, which put Patton in the hospital. And once he was in the hospital, it looks like, or there's good evidence to suggest, that they came in and got him with, I forget the name of the drug that they got him with, but it killed him, and they'd gotten rid of him that way.
So Douglas Bazada was an OSS-trained Jedburgh. So for people that aren't familiar with what that means, could you describe what his training was and what he actually has admitted in his diary?
Well, his training was, the Jedburghs were the first special forces. They were sent into France before the invasion, and they set the thing up and did everything to get it going. And Bazada was a terrific Jedburgh. And I'm sorry, what was your next question?
The next question was, as an OSS-trained Jedburgh, what did that mean after the war, too, for him, and how did he admit this in his diary, everything that occurred?
Well, I don't think he would have ever admitted it. When I got to him, he'd had a stroke, and that was the key. And he just sort of, I spent some time with him, about a week with him, and I was interviewing him, trying to ease into it because I knew what I was looking for. And he just opened up these diaries for me, and there were 40 of them. Wow. And it all gave the story of how he had done that.
So, naturally the question is, why would somebody go after a great leader like that? Was Douglas Bazada, was it a sense of duty, or did they have to really kind of convince him that this was the right thing to do?
Well, it was Bazada's duty. He had the duty of being sort of a hitman for Donovan, our first OSS, for our first CIA. The OSS is what that became. And so Donovan told him to go and get Bazada. And Bazada didn't want to do it. He actually liked Patton, but this was his orders, so he did it. And they staged the accident, which put Patton in the hospital.
So as part of that accident, what device did they use to actually critically injure General Patton? Because it wouldn't just been a car accident.
Yeah, what they did is they had a truck waiting for the car to come there, and the truck turned right in front of it. They weren't going very fast, and so that put the position where Bazada had earlier. He had snuck up and followed them earlier before and had rolled the window down. And so that just put the window that was open, this crash, which wasn't they were only going 20 miles an hour. It allowed him to shoot not a bullet, but something that would look like part of the crashing setup, and it hit Patton in the head and completely, almost, he was from the neck down. He
Paralyzed.
couldn't move. Yeah. Paralyzed. That's the word.
Yeah. So with that said, as you're interviewing Douglas Bezada, he actually just finally got it off his chest because of this stroke, because he thought he was about to die.
Yeah, well, I think he just didn't care anymore. He was about to die, and here I came to him at that time with the stroke, and that was the luck for me. And then I took all these diaries, and the diaries had it all. He was agonizing over it, that he'd done this, and he didn't. He was sorry he'd done it, but he'd done it. It was his duty, and so on.
So how did the NKVD, for everybody that is watching and listening right now, the NKVD was the precursor to the KGB. How did the NKVD play into this as well?
Well, behind the Iron Curtain, they knew whatever they were after anybody like Patton, and they wanted to kill him. And I don't think, my book describes how they got into the hospital and gave him this injection, and it killed Patton.
So I think that's kind of raises a lot of eyebrows, because I think people don't understand that the NKVD and the OSS actually worked together, and that they would do that so that the finger pointing would go, both ways, and people would, not know which direction really to look.
That's exactly right. At the end of the war, people forget that we were big buddies with the Russians and thought them to be great people and so on. And the two worked together. And in my book, you'll read that an NKVD agent was both involved with the death of the Patton, and another man I found, Stephen Skubik, who was a CIC agent, totally different than Bezada. He told, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it.
No, it's all right. Skubik told you, or did you interview him as well?
I did. He was dead. I interviewed his son. Skubik wrote a book, and the book tells the whole story of how Skubik went. He was a Ukrainian, and how he went into the communist parts and found a colonel who admitted that they had killed him.
Wow. So you have independent sources corroborating the same story.
Exactly.
When we come back from the break, more with Robert Wilcox, the author of Target Patton and the Soviet infiltration, dramatic infiltration actually, of the Roosevelt administration.
What if I told you could convert your 401k or your IRA into gold? While your retirement is being beat up by a volatile stock market and inflation, it could instead be resting safely in physical gold at a place of your own choosing, including your own business. Look, gold has increased 50% in just the last year. Stock market, it's been nothing but a roller coaster. So protect your retirement from market chaos by calling Verity Metals today.
And we're back with our guest today, Robert Wilcox. He's the author of Target Patton, and really one of the first books I ever read that talked about the tremendous infiltration of the Roosevelt administration. 329 confirmed Soviet agents in the Roosevelt administration. This was corroborated and confirmed by the Venona transcripts and the Matroikin archives and many other documents as well, and some Soviet defectors. Robert, this infiltration of the Roosevelt administration, this wasn't pro-America. They were actually doing everything they could to undermine the United States. not just during the war, but following the war as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a list here of the communists who were in the FDR administration, and they were in top positions here. Lawrence Dugan in State Department. He provided top secret information to the NKVD, and later was probably murdered. Harry Dexter White, the Assistant Secretary of Treasury, who was a spy for the Russians. Lachlan Curry, who was a White House aide, and Harry Hopkins, who was probably the closest man to the president. All of these guys, Michael Straight, Henry Wallace, who might have been vice president if FDR hadn't have put him in there. Duncan Lee, who was Donovan's secretary, was a spy for the Soviets.
So the secretary for the head of the CIA was a spy for the Soviets?
Yes, he was a spy for the Soviets.
Wow.
They were all through. They were riddled with communists at that time. Alger Hiss is the only one that I think finally went to prison for it. But we have a media that doesn't bring this up, but all of this is true.
Well, Alger Hiss, he was the first honorary Secretary General for the United Nations, right? And he also was at Yalta when they were negotiating the split in Europe, which became the Iron Curtain.
Yes. And as I understand it, he was every night before he'd go back to his own place, he'd give everything that was going on in our group discussions that was supposed to be secret. He'd give it to Stalin and whoever was conducting those things.
That's incredible. Now, there were some anti-communists in Eastern Europe at the end of World War II that were fighting against the Soviets. Some of them have actually been smeared, but they had something called the Promethean League. A lot of people haven't even ever heard of that. But the Soviets used these spies also to go after the anti-communists in Eastern Europe.
I'm not familiar with that, but it does sound like what Skubik in my book uncovered. I didn't hear those, but I know Skubik finally encountered. He literally fought his way in to a Russian general who admitted that they were trying to kill Patton. So,
wow. So what does that mean for us today, Robert? I mean, this seems like what you uncovered in your investigations is really the genesis of the deep state, and kind of explains how some people that are very pro-America are undermined from the outset when they're leaders here in the United States. And some of them even have faced attempts at their life, like Reagan and like Trump.
Yeah, that's very perceptive. I think that's what's going on. There's a strong communist influence, and they're just trying to overturn what we've done.
What do you think? What would be your advice to the next generation? How should we, besides knowing our history, and thank you for preserving it in Target Patton, but how should we use that going forward?
Well, we just always have to realize that people have their own aims and ambitions, and I'm just a writer who looks for good stories, and I found that one. But you got to have an even mind and look at all sides. And today, especially, be able to talk about something without becoming angry. Look what they did just recently, killing
Charlie Kirk. Yeah,
Charlie Kirk, right?
So also, and just kind of the last question I've got for you today is, as a result of your investigation and your interview of Douglas Pizzata, another book came out of that regarding the man who very likely planned the Kennedy assassination, Rene Dussault. If you could comment on that.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. It was because of Pizzata that Pizzata and Dussault were very good friends, and Rene Dussault was a Cuban patriot, and he just got mad and wanted to revenge what was going on in Cuba. That is, us trying to fight Cuba. That Dussac story was the one I did after Patton, and it's quite interesting.
Yeah. Are there any books that you have planned for the future?
No, tell me one. I'll go get it.
Well,
I just do what I want to do next, and something crops up and I'll jump into it.
Well, Robert, I just want to thank you for your diligence in preserving history and your source materials, your primary sources that you list in the bibliography in the back of the book is absolutely incredible. That sent me on a whole journey myself 15 years ago. So just want to honor you for that and thank you for being on the show today, and blessings to you and your family.
Well, thank you very much, and the same to you.
Robert Wilcox, the author of Target Patton. Check out the book if you have never read it, or you're like, there was a diary of a guy who actually admitted to killing Patton. Yes, there was. And his friend, Rene Dussac. Douglas Pizzata admitted that was the guy that planned the Kennedy assassination. Yes, this is real. And it's interesting that at the same time Robert Wilcox published these two books, so Target Patton and Target JFK, that another book set came out on the exact same people, General Patton and JFK. And I've got to ask the question, was that timing intended to put Robert Wilcox's books down so people didn't know about them? Well, now you do. Check it out. I think you can buy them on Amazon and other places as well. So what can you do today? Know your history. Pass it on to the next generation, because when we know our history, we're not doomed to repeat it. This is Matt Shea. Thank you for joining me on Patriot Radio today. May God bless all of you, and He is making this generation the greatest one. The awakening is here. So keep up the fight.